guys, welcome back. Finally today we're actually going to get on to playing the bass rather than just holding it. So we've got a lot of ground to cover, so I'm probably going to divide this video up into a few different parts. And that's just getting started on one hand today. So there's a lot of ground to cover, so we're going to crack straight on. Just before we get going, I want to say that I'm going to refer to my right hand an awful lot. When I'm saying that, what I'm meaning is the plucking hand, so this hand that's actually coming into contact with the strings and causing the sound to happen. Appreciate, there's a lot of players that play right-handed or left-handed, and obviously that's going to switch around which hand you're using for that technique. So if I do refer to my right hand, then what I mean is plucking hand, whichever one that happens to be for you. So in my last video we covered a lot about holding the bass and the best way to keep that held onto your body and to keep your hands free and fluid to move. And we're going to do a sort of continuation of that for the first part of this, because what I want to address is how to hold your hand on the bass in order to effectively pluck and cause the sound to happen. Now there's a few different trains of thought on this, so I'm going to address the three most regular and standard versions that I've seen that people use. The first of those we'll call the floating thumb technique, and this one is very much where there's no real anchor point for the hand. The thumb kind of remains free and floating as the fingers are doing the work across the strings. Now the advantage that this technique has is that the thumb will rest against the lower strings of the bass when you're playing higher up, and that'll mute them, so you get no unwanted string noise from the lower strings when you're playing. Okay, so that has a real advantage on that front. But the disadvantage of that is that there isn't that anchor point. There's no sort of pivot point for your hand to rest on and pull against the strings on. And where that may leave you becoming unstuck is it will leave you, it won't be quite as accurate. So you won't have sort of the solidity of your thumb being anchored somewhere and your fingers pulling against that pivot point. So you can get a little bit lost with that one. The sort of opposite end of the spectrum is the permanently anchored thumb. Now this will normally be on the bottom of the pickup, where you rest your thumb on there and that's where it stays. There's no movement on the thumb, and then the fingers walk across the strings like that. Now that gives you a lot more control. That means that your hand is sort of permanently stuck there and you've got something to pull against. You've got a bit of, anchorage to get some sound out of the thing. But where that comes down is that you don't have that muting. So, it's kind of pros and cons on that one. It's kind of where most people start, and it's a good point to sort of get used to having your thumb pressed up against the pickup and pulling against that. Now the third technique is kind of a hybrid of those two, and it's probably where I put myself in terms of how I play, and that's I'll call the movable thumb anchor, and that's starts off the same as the permanent anchor. So you're resting your thumb against the bottom of the pickup like this, and then you're plucking against it, but as you move up the strings across the body of the bass, you move that thumb to come and rest on the low string just initially, and then as you go up the strings, you move across. Now that gives you kind of the best of both worlds in that you have that anchor point to pull against to pluck the strings, but you're also muting those lower strings as you're working across the bass. Now for me personally, I kind of only work my way from the bottom of the pickup to the bottom string. As you may notice, my thumb is pretty bendy. I've got a double jointed thumb, so I don't find that the angle of my hand changes an awful lot across the strings. So I kind of get across there to stretch across, but I don't really go very much further. But if you have a normal straight thumb, then you might want to investigate going across on the other strings. The advantage that will give you is that it's again a continuation of that sort of straight line that you want to keep to avoid any damage to your hand and wrist. So you start off here and your hand is in a kind of tight bridge shape, but if you stay anchored there and stretch all the way across, so you're moving from that kind of shape to that kind of shape, and that's quite a stretch for your fingers. Now if you're moving across, the shape of your hand stays pretty much the same all the way, and that means that your technique will stay the same also. So it's good to get used to firstly anchoring your thumb, having a permanent anchor for your thumb there, and just getting used to plucking, and then moving your thumb across when you're playing. Okay, so when you actually come to play, your technique will stay the same. Okay, so that's the first 5 minutes done. We'll move on to part 2 in the next video.